Hello, everybody. Today is day 174, and we're continuing from the book of First Kings, reading in the 12th chapter through the 14th. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, is made king. Now, the elders counsel with Rehoboam, and they're encouraging him to forsake some of the heavy-handedness of the leadership of his father Solomon, and rather than being so overpowering, they're encouraging Rehoboam to consider a method of servant leadership. They are encouraging this king to consider being a servant king and thus changing somewhat of Solomon's model. He then pursues a younger crowd. It's as if he hears the elders and then he moves on and he asks some of the young crowd, what would you do? And their response is, hey, listen, let's toughen things up. So Rehoboam listens to the wrong voices, but the Bible tells us that the Lord was in this, and that was in fulfilling the consequences of Solomon's own rebellion and his distancing himself from the commands of God, thus causing the tribe of Judah to be broken from the rest of the nation. This all was in the plan of God, the will of God. And sometimes we don't realize how God is involved even in situations that we would consider to be unpleasant. But God was very much at work here. Jeroboam is then made king. Judah had considered fighting against Israel, but God tells them to go home and to not do it, and to see and to be reminded that God was in this, in what had transpired. And so they went home and they did not pursue a war. Then the tragic departure from God by King Jeroboam. It's amazing, isn't it, that this king is attracted to paganism and building the high places, and it just seems like the corruption expands and is entrenched in him, and he sinks lower and lower. God sends a man of God who speaks of a coming judgment. Now, King Jeroboam is offended. He rejects this word that is supposedly from God and calls for the man of God to be arrested. Well, the prophecy is quickly fulfilled, and before anything can happen, judgment falls, and the king begs for mercy, and God answers and extends grace to this king. Well, the man of God seems to be deceived by this supposed prophet. Now, we don't know based on what the language is here, but he does say an angel told him that he should go back and eat and spend time. He says, in fact, an angel even told him. Now, we're told in the New Testament that when God tells us something from his word, though an angel or anybody else were to preach any other gospel than what has been preached, let that person or that angel even be accursed. And it appears that this man of God was in many ways seduced and deceived. And yet God speaks to this prophet for whatever reason, and the man of God dies because of his disobedience. Now, finally, King Jeroboam's son is sick, and he sends his wife disguised to a blind prophet. But the prophet is told by God before the wife approaches. He identifies who this woman is. And the prophet forecasts a dismal report, and the child dies. Now, Jeroboam finally dies, and Judah thus strays from God. And we see this erosion of this one tribe that is, they're building these high places, these images, these abominations. And we asked ourselves, how is this possible? And why is God so merciful pertaining to this? If this had been any one of us, we probably would have just simply said, I've had it with this and I'm done with this. In fact, even the temple treasure is taken. All of the riches and the wealth is confiscated and it's gone. And we think, why doesn't God just destroy Israel, especially the tribe of Judah, who he'd been so merciful to? And we know the answer. Before the covenant promise, he promised that through David would come the Messiah. And God is intent on keeping his promise and preserving the line that will lead to the fulfillment of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. All of this is just loaded, isn't it? With so many aspects, it's too much for us to actually talk and consider in 5-minute time. But all of this holds together a beautiful story of God's involvement with man, with his people, of their failures, of their sin, their rebellion, but God's continual work to bring them back and to fulfill the promises and the prophecies of a coming deliverer.